Nick.
All right, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on CIS Controls 1 and 2. This is going to be a fun discussion because it's really challenging, like really challenging for MSPs in particular. So if you're listening to the recording, you may, and especially if you're listening to the audio only recording, I just want everyone to know this doesn't affect any people live with us today. But just know you may want to watch the video because we're going to get kind of collaborative through this session. And so this may be one of those that's difficult for you to listen to the audio only. All right, so let's jump in. Maybe let's start with some discussion to kick us off, right? So for those of you that don't, like, I'm assuming everyone that's on this call today is at least familiar with the CIS controls. If you're not, I've got a ton of resources for you. We just did an introduction to the CIS controls about a month and a half ago in Empath. I can give you links to that if you need it. Also, we do the podcast, the CIS controls. It's called the Cybercast. If anyone doesn't listen to that, highly recommend it. Cybercast is all one word. Just search in Spotify or any of your podcast app and it'll show up. And we actually go through every CIS control. So I'm assuming you know that, right? So CIS control 1 is inventory and control of enterprise assets. And then CIS control 2 is inventory and control of software assets. So the best way to think about this is like the hardware and software in our MSP. And that sounds easy when we get started with this, right? And I think if you talk to a lot of enterprise folks, they'll say, yeah, it's not the simplest thing out there, but it's also not like ridiculously hard because in their brain, they're thinking only myself. But there's some math that goes into this as an MSP, right? The math is it's not just me, but it's also plus N being the number of clients that I have. And where this gets really challenging for MSPs is trying to build this out for all of the clients that you have in place. It gets really hard. And it brings up a million questions that we'll talk about today. Things like, do I bill for this? How do I bill for it? What's a process that I can handle in a managed approach to having this work for everybody, right? So now that I've kind of kicked the meeting off with kind of an intro, I want to open up to you guys and I want to hear from you guys when we talk about asset inventory. What is your MSP doing with that today? And it's totally fair for you to say nothing. That's okay too. So who wants to go first?
All right, I'll go first. So the difficulty comes in with new clients, existing clients, especially the ones that have been with us for many years. But I think we got a good handle on, of the inventory and what's, and what's part of the stack, right? But yes, the challenge comes in when new clients come on board and we have no idea what they're using and if they actually have a legitimate need for whatever, everyone, because, it's pretty much the Wild West.
Yep.
And, people start installing their own things, Candy Crush, right? It just that just came to mind, but applications like that or Spotify, right? To listen to music. So yeah, that's where the difficulty is.
100%.
Mhm.
So
And not necessarily getting the inventory or getting a good overview of what they have, but just going through the process of, okay, do you actually need QuickBooks right on your computer? Yes, some accounting may need it, but other users may have it installed because at some point they were helping the accounting department or things like that.
Yep.
So
okay, well said. Yeah, and so I think Deckley brings up great points around we inherit where our clients are at. There's sprawl, and go, like, even if you got a perfect baseline today of all 60 of your clients and you're like, yes, what's happening tomorrow that just changes this drastically, right? They're just one installation away. They're only just one click on a SSO to some new cloud platform and everything changes. So there's a zen to this, right? There's definitely a process to this that really makes this challenging. So Degley, really well said. Who else wants to jump in? I'm really good at waiting.
Well, and I'll jump in here to say that. So I've used the tools that you're using to look around, right? So Nmap, right? I mean, easiest thing, you get on the network, you can say, give me the subnet, and I can look around, right? There's some really cool tools. I haven't played with Run Zero yet, but I really have heard good things about it for finding that inventory. So how many times have you gone into a client? They say, yeah, I got 5 or 6 computers, maybe the server in the back that I know about, and then you get on. And then they have like 20, 25 or 50, IP addresses on the network, the cameras and the printers and, everything that they might have put in that they didn't even think about. Oh, that has an IP address, right? That kind of inventory thing is, I mean, when you go into scope the work, you tell them, okay, this is based upon what you told me, but you got to know that they have other stuff in the network that you're gonna have to, and maybe it's an upsell, or when they bring in new stuff, when they bring in that new, IoT device that does something cool for their business, and they don't tell you about it, and then it could, it could cause its own problems. So
okay.
Those are the kind of things that I'm looking at.
Yeah, it's great, Nick. And by the way, thanks for joining us today. It's good to have you on. That's awesome. Well said. And we're going to dive into some tools here in a minute. So we will get tool focused because I think you have to. This is one of these controls that, tools are pretty heavy, and there's a lot of tools you might have to look at. So we'll get into some of that. And can't wait to kind of share and hear what others are using. We're going to have a board that will come out of this in a minute too. So you all kind of be able to share and collaborate and get some new ideas on things. Stephen, I'm curious your thoughts. I see you pensive and ready to talk. I know you got some thoughts here.
I almost always have thoughts. I was just gonna go off of what Nick had said as well, which is the fun part of, the owner or whoever goes and sells it and comes back and says, oh, they have, 4 servers. And then tech goes in and finds out, yeah, but those 4 servers are running 20 virtuals.
Yep.
So.
Yep. And that brings up a question that we're going to answer in a minute. What is an asset? Right? That's something that needs to be thought through. So I'm going to share my screen out. This is good. And here's what we're going to do today. I was mentioning this before I hit recording. This is either going to go really well or it's going to crash and burn. So whichever way, it doesn't matter. We're going to have fun doing it. I got a bunch of stuff to show you guys, and I'm going to give you a couple links that I want you to get access to, because we're going to do some of this together as like a thought exercise, because I am not here to tell you I have all the answers to CIS Control 1 and 2. I am here to tell you this is really hard for MSPs, but there's a lot of opportunity in it. And one of the biggest areas of discussion I get into when I'm talking to MSP friends is, how the heck do you do CIS Controls 1 and 2 well? For an MSP, it's difficult. So I want you to be encouraged by that. So let me share my screen out. And what I want to share with you is a couple different things. First of all, this right here, I just have the read the docs open. Let me just copy pasta this in. If you guys haven't actually read the CIS controls before, they're right here. We're not going to spend too much time on these, but here's control 1. And then down below are each of the sub controls. So I do want to read each of these, and we'll jump over to control 2 in just a second too. So establish and maintain a detailed enterprise asset inventory, right? So that alone kind of brings up questions, right? What is an enterprise asset inventory? What should go into it? They give you some ideas of things. And just like you guys just mentioned, they give us things to think about, like IoT, cloud stuff. What about, you mentioned virtual machines. It may run on top of a physical asset. So this gets difficult for sure. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, right? We see that this is implementation group 1, which means this is basic level. So CIS is telling us, you got to do this. This is not one of those ones you put off towards later. We get into, how do we address unauthorized assets? So what does that look like? Again, once again, it is implementation group 1. It brings up the question of, do we even know how to find an unauthorized IT asset? So we'll talk about that today. Utilizing an active discovery tool. This is where I think they tend to say we're going to push some of the tools off until like implementation group 2, because tools take money and take some expertise and focus. I'm not sure I agree with that, but hey, that's okay. Then they talk about using DHCP logging for discovery, and then passive asset discovery tools, which are like tools that are looking at things like network traffic and things like that to find something new. Okay. So that's control 1. And then control 2, now we're looking instead of hardware, and notice that they changed, by the way, I don't know, you guys may not care about this, in the last version of the CIS controls, version 7, they called it hardware assets. They've changed the name to enterprise assets. And Phyllis says the reason they changed the name was just because of this world of cloud and platform as a service. Like, it's hard to use the word hardware anymore. So it's just enterprise. But I think in your brain, you can still use hardware. And then we get into software assets. And so same exact thing, but now we're talking about what is an asset when it comes to software and why we need to handle this. So once again, you see all this kind of stuff that's in here, maintaining the inventory, making sure it's currently supported, addressing unauthorized software. Once again, just like hardware, we have to have some concept of what's there, not there, using inventory tools, like we mentioned before, to have this in place. And then we get into allow listing. And this allow listing stuff is a little bit more difficult. We're not going to talk a lot about that today. We're really going to talk today about how to build and how to get the asset list in place. Okay, so those are the big things we want to talk about. Before I jump further, anyone have any questions or thoughts so far?
I have a, it just reminded me of this. So in the very near future, there are several clients that are gonna go fully remote. Their leases, office leases are up this year in the next few months. And I think that's gonna become very difficult. I mean, if to keep inventory, because now everybody's gonna be working from their house fully until who knows when. Yes, during the pandemic, it was it was chaos, but we didn't really worry about keeping asset inventory or keeping track of whatever they had at their homes. So do you think we can touch on that, on how to?
Yeah, we will, because, again, we're going to get into some like workshopping here in just a minute, Degley, but let's keep that scenario in mind, not assuming that the client has a physical premise, or if they do have a physical premise and location, what happens when they have a very diverse work staff that's working from home from anywhere? And that's quite common. So let's absolutely make sure that we keep that in mind. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts before we jump in?
Your comment on the tools being 2 or 3, my guess is that they didn't want that to be a stopping factor for businesses getting started.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think you're right. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. The first thing I want to do is I have a Google sheet right here, and this should have this should let everyone have access to. So I'm going to share this out. Anyone with the link is an editor. Yep. So I'm going to pop this in for you guys. And if you're watching the recording today, I will put all of the links that we talk about today. I'll put them into the description for the videos too, so you guys will be able to get to those. So let me find, where did my chat go? Here it is. Let's pop this in as well. So there you go. If you guys want to open that up, and what you're welcome to do is you're welcome to start editing. You're welcome to start adding. You're welcome to start commenting. But what we're really going to do is we're going to get a little bit more visual. I've got a Miro board, and we're going to kind of step through this as a team. Okay, so you're welcome to kind of think through this. So first of all, a couple of things I wanted to kind of mention, and I've kind of covered some of this already, but almost all security frameworks have the concept of asset inventories, because it starts with the premise of I cannot secure what I do not know about. Period. That's an immutable fact of security. So if I am trying to talk to a client about their security and I don't know what's in their network, how am I supposed to have a rational discussion around this? So this needs to be thought about for current clients, and this needs to be thought about for prospects as well. You need to think through, how do we kind of deal with this in prospect conversations? Also, I mentioned why this gets hard. The whole MSP plus N, it's much more easy for a bank to do this than, an MSP with 60 clients. And it's not just a technology problem, right? We have to think through, we have to get active with how that company acquires assets. Who pays for them? How do we know that they're approved and come in? Sometimes the MSP has control over it. Sometimes the MSP is completely unaware. So we're going to talk about all this kind of stuff. So here's what we're going to start with first is prerequisites. And what I'm going to do is I have a Miro board right here. And let me share this out to you guys. You should be able to access this. I'm just using the free version, so it will require you to log in. And if you don't have a login, it's got an SSO kind of thing. It should just kind of pop you right in. Hopefully this is what I meant about crashing and burning. I hope this will work for you guys. I've never really used Miro before. So if you guys will try that and see if you can get logged into this. And if you can, then I'll kind of give you a little walkthrough on how this whole thing works. Yep, I see Jim in. So it looks like it is working, at least for me and Jim only. That's good.
If I can do it, anyone can do it.
Yes. Okay, good. So you guys can see Jim's kind of mouse hovering around. The way this thing works, if you click the little mouse button right here or hit V for select, V is violet, you can kind of move, you can kind of select things. Now you guys will have the ability to move things around, so please don't do that. If you want to scroll, hit and hold the space bar, and notice what happens is it turns to a little hand and you can kind of drag around. If you've ever been in Photoshop, it's very similar to Photoshop. So hit and hold space and it turns your mouse to a hand. And then what you can do is just use the mouse to kind of scroll in. And so here's where we're going to start right here is what is an asset under prerequisites? What is an asset for your MSP? So what you can do, I've already got us one started. You can click right here and you can literally just copy and paste this thing. You can just right click on it and then copy and then paste your own in. Or you can go right here. There is a sticky note button or just hit the in button. It doesn't matter how you do it. So what I want you guys to start doing is thinking through what are assets, and let's start popping these in as sticky notes for you. What is an asset for you? Anyone else not able to get in by any chance? I see little mouses going around everywhere. This is great.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So I'll add one for me. And feel free for you guys to talk as you're doing this. Like you can ask people, hey, do you guys think this is right? Does this, would this be an asset for you? The reason that this is important while you're kind of getting going on this is we do need to have this defined. This should go into some amount of I think policy statements need to be high level. Like the organization will build and maintain an asset inventory containing all the critical elements of the company and review it biannually, something like that. But then when you dive in a little bit deeper, I do think the policy should probably describe at a high level what some of these assets are. And the reason I think, again, that's important is so that we're all kind of level set on what exactly it is we're doing here. So as you guys are building some of these things out, anything in particular stand out to you? Remember, we want to think about software assets and hardware assets. All right, Jared, I'm going to call you out, my friend, because you're writing a good one here. So you're saying any network addressable system, anything programmable. What else did you have here? Anything that involves production, that's good, like PLCs or SCADA for like factory control systems, things like that. Anything that's good stuff. I don't know who did the green one, but that's good. Anything that has a direct line connect to company servers or data. Okay. Anything that stores data. And remember, we can kind of cheat a little bit. We can go back over here to like the CIS control documentation. If you still see my screen, what about mobile devices, right? Do those count? I think they have to. What about, we kind of mentioned network devices and IoT and things like that, servers, just because if we say anything with a MAC address, if you don't know, a MAC address is like, what's the hardware level address that it uses to connect to the network, wireless or wired. So if it has that it's going to count any of those kinds of things. But we do want to think about, virtual machines, how do we include that? Because I guess a virtual machine should have a MAC address, so that might include it there. Let me go ahead and add in mobile devices, because sometimes if we think about this, even though a mobile device has a MAC address, what if that mobile device is very rarely on the network, but it has access to data? How about this one? What about SaaS apps? That would count. What about third-party vendors that may or may not be SaaS? All right. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, for the SaaS apps, that's what I was thinking about is, so what's the asset there? Is it the data that's in the SaaS app? Or is it the license for the SaaS app? Is it the something else, right? Because you don't own it, right? It's running somebody else's data center, right? So what's the asset there? But I agree that there's business data there, there's customer data there, and who owns that?
Yeah. So let's make a note there. At a high level, but it gets far more granular. Because you're exact. So this is how, and that's a great point, Nick. This is kind of how we get started with some of this stuff, is that it's a win. If we've never done this before ever, just knowing all the SaaS apps in place is a huge win. But that's not where we finish, right? Because we do need to know, okay, what kinds of data does that SaaS app have? What kind of systems does that SaaS app use on their end? Now all of a sudden you have some questions. You can start to say, hey, third-party vendor that's critical for us. Thank you so much for what what you're doing. We're just trying to get an understanding of kind of how you guys operate and what you have in place. So 100% agree. Okay, so we're going to come back to this one. Let's shift. I see you guys are already working all kinds of stuff. That's good. Let's shift over to tools for a minute. So what tools would you guys use for building an asset inventory? And keep in mind, it doesn't have to just be a software like tool, so to speak. Like I'm going to put one in here. Watch this. This thing called Excel, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that can export into a CSV that you're just going to have to deal with. Here's another one you may not have thought of. What about an accounting system? Like maybe Peachtree or what's the other one? QuickBooks. Why? Anyone have an idea on why those would be important?
Well, because if clients are doing what do you call it? As part of their capital expenditures,
Depreciation.
Depreciation, yes.
Yep.
I characterize that as financial aspects.
Yeah. It's a source of truth, right? In the sense of, what if you have something that you're paying for, you're like, what the heck is this? I've never heard of this before. When I was at the bank, that's one of the ways that we found some when we were doing our asset inventory for the first time, I found things I had no idea about. And I was like, hey, what the heck is this Harlan Check Pro thing? I've literally never heard of it. It never showed up on a scan. It never showed up anywhere because it was on one computer that was in our wire room that was like sort of on a separate network. I'd never heard of it before. I'm like, I'm the dang CIO. What is this thing? And so, yeah, that's sometimes how you'll find some things. I like this visual eyes on inspection, right? That for sure is a way that you'd find it. Yeah.
I think one thing to keep in mind too is ask yourself, what's the goal of the inventory that you're working to create? Because inventories exist for many different reasons, beyond security, technology, even, procurement, accounting. They all have different reasons for wanting to know what the heck is in the environment. And that can also, knowing what else is out there in terms of what already exists, that's a great place to start to leverage other information that you can utilize to build your inventory to inform it. I wouldn't necessarily rely on it, but it can certainly kind of see into some of the dark corners that you may not think about or otherwise know about.
Really well said. So we may not finish it today, Mike, but to your point, I just drew up a new box, you know, so what's the goal for each of these systems or these tools, right? So something to think about, right? You know, so financial systems might be used to get a picture on like what we're actually paying for, maybe Microsoft Azure, you know, to understand what SSO and maybe, you know, what kinds of shadow IT might exist, you know. That's a good point, though. Let's bring up shadow IT for the tools. What would you guys use to identify shadow IT?
In a perfect world, a SIM.
Okay. Agree. So SIM would be a great tool. Anything else?
NAC.
Again, like you said,
Okay.
network stuff, watching network traffic to the, you know, services that are out there, right?
What about this is going to show my lack of knowledge. What about in Azure where you can see all your authorizations? There is a way you can see, may just have to write this in. I don't know if anyone's more.
You can see associated devices.
In Azure?
Like per user, you can see where they've installed things, that kind of.
Okay.
And you can see what apps have been approved for authentication too. That's what you're looking at, I think.
That's what I was thinking of. And approved applications. Is that Alex Farling?
Yeah.
Nice to have you on.
But can
Thanks,
you
buddy.
do that even when you're not using Intune to manage?
I think so.
Okay.
Oh,
I don't
well,
know.
technically, you just
Yeah, you can.
in tune, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well
And then
said.
of
Unless someone
course there's
copied.
third-party apps for this too, right? You've got Augment, Sasleo, Zorus, those three. Like you can go out and buy a product specific to this.
100%. And I don't
There-
mind putting vendor names on here, right? Because we're just talking about how to get things done. So let's put Sasleo, Augment, and what was the other one you mentioned? Zorus?
Zorus, yeah.
And I'll
Those
just
are
put it
three I
center.
know that do it. Cisco, their DNS umbrella might do it. I don't know.
Okay.
Those
I
are
mean,
the
there are
kind of
other
products
apps.
I'd look for.
Sorry. Yeah, there are other apps that, based on their use, you can get inventory because you'll see where they were installed. Like Cintian does the local configuration.
I'll just put Cintian in there just to keep those names. Okay, great. So what you see here is there's a lot of tools that go into this, and that can get scary. There's a lot of sprawl. There's a lot of cost that can go into this. And so one of the things I think that's important is to go back to the Zen mentality, right? Like, you know, perfect is the enemy here. You got to start somewhere. And so some of these things are completely free in the sense of like, you know, your accounting system is already in existence. So you should be able to pull some things out of that. There should be some places that you can go with. So maybe let's rearrange these if we could into, and I know this can get a little dangerous because we got about 20 people in here all moving stuff around, but can we make the top rows the ones that should be the easiest, the middle rows, what we think might be the like medium level in terms of complexity and cost, and then the things that are going to be hard or expensive at the bottom? You guys want to do some dragging and dropping so we can kind of like figure this out?
So we're putting the low hanging fruit at the top.
Low hanging fruit at the top.
For the
Yep.
top, yeah, good. Yeah, good.
So for example, Excel should be at the very top. I saw someone drag that to the bottom, right? Because that's a free tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of this depends on what's licensed and not as
Yep.
to whether it becomes easy or
Yeah,
not. But yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So that's pretty good. So let's move downward. And let's go over to what's our approach to getting an asset inventory started. So I started with a hope and a prayer because that's where we all start. You know, maybe one day this will all just fall in line for us, you know, that'd be nice. So how do we get this thing started? And I like what some of you already put some things in here that are really good. Ask them what they know is there. See what level they're even playing at. Yeah, for sure. Like, you know, opening those conversations. And I think we can even, so like one thing we can do here is if you see someone write something that's really good, we can continue to stretch this down. In fact, let's make this box even longer. So what we can do here is I'm going to take a riff off of this one. Jim, was that yours in green? I don't know if it was yours or not. But
Yeah,
one thing,
I'm agreeing.
okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Jim's and we can actually do something with this. Watch this. If I can get it to copy and paste. Come on, man. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to use the arrow button and I'm just going to sort of like draw from here to here so that we can kind of see this is a thought flow. So we can ask them what they have in place. And then I can even ask them this. How do you make money? If you guys know Brian Blakely, I'm a huge fan of Brian Blakely. Follow him on LinkedIn. He has this whole talk track that he does around, hey, Miss Client, will you talk to me about how do you make money? Well, what are you talking about? We print these metal widgets that go into this device, and that's what we do. What are you talking about? Oh, no, I totally understand that. But like, where do your inputs come from? You know, oh, well, we source them from here and here and here. Write some of that down. Okay, great. And how do you order those things? Oh, well, we actually use a phone. It's the only way we can do this is over a phone. Oh, really? Wow. Okay. What would happen if that phone was offline? You couldn't reach them, you know? So, okay. So, and then how are they delivered? Oh, they come in off like FedEx, you know, less than load because they're huge. Okay. Got it. How do we know? How do you know when those deliveries are coming in? Okay. Now, once those come in, how do you start the process of like turning those into like the metal devices, you know? So you get them talking about their processes and you're making comments along the road. And you see how like, as you start to have those conversations, they're going to start to say, you're going to start to identify critical systems, critical processes, critical vendors, critical data points, because what you're asking them to do is help trace the flow of money in their organization, how it goes from inputs to process to finished goods, whether it's physical, whether it's, you know, software, whatever it is. That how you make money is a great approach to starting the asset inventory because it will identify things you may not have thought of, right? But what other, that's right, follow the money. That's right, Degley. But what other things can we do? You know, I'll put one in just to kind of get us started. Actually, I think someone did.
I'd throw directory services in there, right? Anything that they, you know, once they start attaching things to directory services, it starts taking inventory.
Okay. You want to add that
So
in?
whether
Alex,
it's
do you need a
AD
link?
or Azure? Yeah, I don't have the link, but that's right.
Here, copy link. I'll just put it back into chat. It's in the Zoom chat. You may have missed it. If anyone is joined in late and you're missing the links, let me know and I can get them over to you. Yeah, so that's good. Also, I think, yeah, so asking accounting and procurement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that one into sort of this ask category, right? Like these are all kind of related. There's all of this kind of comes into like almost like interviewing, right? There's definitely an interviewing perspective here. I can't get the arrows to work. Not smart enough. Let's try that one more time. There we go. Okay, what else are we not thinking of here, guys and gals? I see a questionnaire from Nick. I think that's great. What about what do you guys do in what's your assessment process look like for a potential new client? Do you guys do any kind of like network assessment kind of question like I don't know, network scanning? You know, I'm sure you do those kind of things. How does that input into this? I'm going to lean on you, Mike Cole, because you do a lot of this. It is just, so if you guys don't know Mike Cole, he works for Coalfire. Is that right?
No, GuidePoint.
GuidePoint. Sorry. GuidePoint.
It used to be a Coalfire. Now I'm a Guide.
Okay. And so assessments are your jam, to say the least. This is literally what Mr. Cole does. So what else should an MSP be doing for a client from maybe a technical perspective to start the asset inventory?
Oh, well, you're going to start, you know, with understanding the boundaries, the scope. What are the IP ranges? So let's define the terms of what the environment, the technical boundaries are, you know, for the playing field. And you want to make sure that that's covered for both cloud and any on-prem environments that they have.
Okay.
That's probably the first place to start, because if you're missing entire subnets, I mean, I don't want to say you're wasting your time, but man, it's going to drastically alter your results, your outputs, as well as it's going to damage your strategy and how, and you could take the wrong approach to doing this because you didn't have all the information, right? So we want to make sure that we have all the inputs that we can to define the boundary of the environment, and then we can start breaking it up. Think of it as like creating a grid almost. And all right, in sector A12, we want to know what that's where we're going to target and try to figure out what is living in that environment, regardless of what it is. Then you move on to the next square. That's how I recommend to clients to how to approach this, is to break it up into small chunks instead of just turning on a scanner and just letting loose, because you're going to get everything back in it, but it's all going to be in one big bucket, right? And you're not going to have the context for what goes where, and it'll also be it will damage you. Damage, not the right word. It will adversely impact how you move forward, determining what is important and what is not. When it's all in one big bucket, you can't prioritize.
Love it. Great stuff. So I'm taking your notes and I'm kind of popping that in here. All right. What else do you guys think here? What are we missing?
I mean, that's where diagramming helps out. Diagramming on how do you make money, diagramming on the bigger containers, like, okay, you have on-prem stuff. Oh, you also have a cloud piece, you have remote pieces, so just putting those big buckets like you were talking about, and then how do they connect?
Great point. So
maybe there's a data center as well as on-prem, as well as cloud.
Yeah. So some of that might happen. You might be able to reverse if you guys are looking at my screen. I don't know, but I have data. So we question for scoping. We understand what IP addresses, what networks, cloud systems. Then we can start discovery, to Mike Cole's point, which would then input into data flow diagrams. You could potentially switch those two. They feed off each other. And then that gets into the how you make money, right? So that gets back into the, hey, we found this, can we talk about how that system is used for you? So yeah, that's good. Really good. I love this. Ask about business critical applications, right? So this kind of gets back into, I'm going to drag this up here. Whoever wrote that, it's good. And, add this in up here. Alex, I know you have a talk track around that, right? Of like having the client kind of identify what's mission critical for them, something like that. Can you elaborate on that?
If I can find, I can't find the mute button. I lost all my Zoom buttons. But yeah, I mean, it's really just about sitting down and having that talk. It kind of plays into the how do you make money conversation, right? What are the things that if they were gone tomorrow would impact your ability to ring the cash register? And that's the language I like to use, because everybody understands how money flows through their business. So, what are the applications that make that work? And they'll usually give you, 10% of them or 15% of them. And as you start to back your way into it, if you ask the right probing questions, one answer from them usually leads to 3 or 4 more things that either the CEO didn't know he owned or just hadn't thought about at the time.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the point. Ask different people. If they have an IT person, they'll have one answer. If they have a CFO, they'll have another. CEO will have another.
And even if you get down to frontline managers, like sometimes they know about things that nobody else knows about because they're training their team on it.
Anyone here? Someone's going to say something. Maybe not. Okay. Anyone here heard of a business impact analysis? So in the future, we need to do a session on BIAs. But BIA can be an output out of a lot of this, because once we start to understand what is mission critical, and we get that from asset scanning that feeds things in, we get that from interviews of understanding how the business makes money, and we've interviewed the right people. The next thing that comes up is, well, now that we've identified those critical systems, what are the inputs and outputs to make them work? How long can we exist without them? who are the critical people that are important to getting those systems online, both the users of that system and maybe like the technicians or engineers on that system. We can start asking those questions. That way, when ransomware hits the fan, we're not running around like a chicken with a head cut off. We're running around knowing what's critical in the restoration order. And so someone barks at you and says, I need this thing. We say, absolutely you do. But this is level 3. We got to get through 1s and 2s first. Remember, we have a BIA. It sets the standard on what we're doing. So that's one thing that's very, 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 very important in the event of a disaster. Anyone done a BIA before? Alex has. Stephen's nodding his head. Okay. Anyone not done a BIA? Okay. Nick hasn't. Yeah, Jim, I figured you hadn't because you're new into the industry, which is awesome. Cool. So at some point we'll do a BIA. It'll be a lot of fun. Okay. So now I want to come back to this. We listed tools up above, but what about now that we've kind of done some of this, any other tools that you might think of off the beaten path that, actually, sorry, my brain's not going right. Any assets, sorry, that tools might miss? Anything that would count as an asset that all the scanning stuff, now that we've kind of identified what the process would look like, anything assets might miss. And I'm just going to write the big one in that I think is obvious. I'll steal it, is, interviews with people, right? Like, not only are people an asset, but sometimes tools are not going to scan. They're going to miss things that, you had no idea. Portable media. What a great example. That stuff is offline and sometimes critical, and we forgot about it. Anything else in your brains that might be not scannable by an asset? I see, Jared, you got a note up. I'm excited to see what you write.
I've seen credit card processing be isolated.
Okay. Yeah. So I think we could, if you'll write that one in there.
Yeah, I got it.
And that kind of makes me think a little bit more about what's our approach. I don't know, Mike Cole, if that whole idea of isolated networks, is that something that needs to be asked in the scoping, that blue note that's there? Where do we ask the whole, like, do you have isolated networks that are air gapped?
That's a really good question. Probably in that box there is probably where it's what I call, like when you're in a good argument and somebody stops and says, define your terms. Well, define your terms. It means just that. Let's figure out what are all of the elements that we need to include. Let's identify those and make sure that we have them all within our grid. And then we can start tackling the grid boxes individually.
Okay. Man, you could teach a whole course on this. Might have to have you do that sometime. Okay, so you got 4G, 5G devices. I like that because you may just completely miss that, since those are, could be connected independently. Even getting into mobile devices. That's good. It's good. All right, we've talked about shadow IT a little bit below, but I don't think we've probably fully finished and fleshed out that conversation. But BYOD, bring your own device, and shadow IT are very similar to each other, right? In the sense of, like, we typically don't always have good visibility into it. Sometimes those devices are brought in and out of our networks. Sometimes they don't have an actual procurement process. So, for example, what's to stop me from, if I'm a BYOD, from having an Android and an Apple device that are both connected to corporate assets? Nothing stops that, right? What about an iPad and an iPhone? Nothing stops that. So this brings in this question of, same with shadow IT, you guys all just signed into Miro, with an SSO. How many orgs know that, and and maybe that's okay. Maybe in Miro, we're just writing some stuff down, which is what we're doing. But what if this were a deep collaboration, and we're talking about some intellectual property? We're trying to brainstorm out how this new feature release for this thing that we're doing is going to be, used. Maybe we're a DoD manufacturer, and now all of a sudden we've shipped out some data to this Miro thing that we have no idea about. How the heck do you deal with that?
I would say even just the stuff that's in the news, literally for Zoom and changing their terms of service for using their AI on. I mean, is this discussion? Did we all consent to having what we're talking about here included in the AI? You know, that Zoom's building, right? And I was literally just thinking about that. You know, getting some clients on calls. You know, okay, hey, just install Zoom. It's easy, right? You know, whatever. But they click through the T's and C's and. You know, maybe it's nothing burger, right? But maybe it's not. Maybe you're right if you're talking to DoD contractors, right?
You say that, but then even if it's not Zoom, like even if you stay on your Teams network, what happens when Firefly's AI shows up and records your whole call? You know, what happens when Gong shows up and records your call and then puts AI against it to give sales analytics to determine, you know, and then they've processed the whole thing. The one that scares me is what about all the crap that people paste into ChatGPT trying to get their day job done faster and easier?
Yep. So what does an MSP do about these things, Alex? Do you just sort of have the conversation so the client understands the risk and they kind of make the calls and then you implement according?
Tear out all your hair? I don't know.
Right?
Head meet sand.
You got to have some thoughts here, Alex.
Well, this is one that bothers me a lot. I feel like we have enough trouble having way more serious conversations with our customers about stuff that should be just permission to play things today, like MFA. And I think this is so far beyond that these are hard conversations to have.
So does an MSP then need carve outs in their MSAs that their lawyer helped them write that says we're not responsible for and we will bill separately for any kind of incidents or damages by the customer bringing their own IT assets in, you know, or the damages of using something, you know, unapproved?
I don't think it's just IT assets. It's, you know, IT assets and applications and et cetera, you know.
How many of you guys have anything like that in your MSA?
And not us, but he just gave us a really good idea.
Yeah.
You know, and going back to AI and you know, ChatGPT, we've been emailing and having verbal conversations with clients and users, and you know, and the C's about it, and you know, we're basically telling them we're not going to stop you from using it and playing around with it, but just be mindful of what you're using it for, because whatever you put in there, it'll stay there forever. And
I think to some point policy needs to get updated to account for that, right? Degley's onto something there, but at some point you've got to say, hey, Mr. Customer, here's a blurb that should be in your company policy, or here's a sample of a blurb that helps to say, hey, Mr. Employee, here's how you use ChatGPT without being a danger to the business and your livelihood and everyone else's livelihood in the building.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the mistake along those lines that people are trying to do is here's a blurb that says, tell your employees they can't use it. Right. And that's not an effective solution either, because it is powerful and can actually benefit them a lot.
No, I think the answer is here's how you should use it versus how you shouldn't use it, right? Use it to help you craft an email when you're emotional and need to take some of the tone out of something. Don't use it when you're trying to craft the cure for cancer.
And I think that I was just having the discussion at ChannelCon with a guy that died playing Chris. He had some great ideas. I was saying every company is going to need a AI policy, right? Whether or not it's, you know, you can use it, you can't use it, go crazy. Are you doing it for support? Are you doing it for marketing? Are you doing it for HR, whatever? But he said, yeah, of course, but we're just at the beginning of it, and it's going to be like everybody has a password policy. It's just something that every business has. You know, I mean, you go real small, maybe not, but you know, anything mid-market and above definitely is going to have that, and it's going to be standard operating procedure. And I think that there's opportunity to, for guidance on helping get those policies set up. I see some people on LinkedIn thinking that same direction of helping businesses get their AI policy set up, and the consulting and help that I think MSPs can bring to that is going to be specialized and valuable.
Yeah, and you know, the only one of the issues I see with that is that yes, you know, absolutely, we have to go towards that goal, but implementing those policies, it's so slow compared to the
the speed of AI taking off, right? And by the time, a company implements those policies, the damage might already been done. So, yeah,
I think you're not wrong. I mean, the stuff that I heard, there's something like 1,000 AI companies being generated a week or something like right now, that it's just, and maybe that's right, maybe it's not, but it is. I think that you're exactly right, Dagley. It's keeping the pace of that is, outstripping anything that I think I've seen,
But I don't
20
see a way to
years.
deal with it other than policy. I mean, does anybody have a better idea? Because, my original thought was, go block the chat GPTs of this world at the gateway, but now it's baked into every tool that you use.
Yeah.
It's not like you can't DNS it out of here.
I was going to say, you can't just say chat GPT in your policy either, because Bing,
Even if somebody came up with a subscription list, you could sign up to as long as you're signed up to the list, you blocked them all, then you couldn't use Microsoft Office, right? I mean, it's in everything.
Yep. I mean, there's
Well,
Bing's version,
chat.
which hits it. There's Bard, there's Claude. There's a bazillion of them.
There's MSP GPT. Like, I'm literally, that guy pinged me on LinkedIn today.
Yep. And
Why
this is because OpenAI is extensible. That's why you see all these people with a unique business case. It's nothing other than just using GPT in certain creative ways.
And what Meta just did with their open.
Yep.
I mean, that's just going to explode things even more. So,
yep. So this is definitely something. Isn't that funny how we stumble into this from asset inventory, but it all overlaps, doesn't it? So let's go now. Let's just zoom out for a second. If you guys want to just look at my screen, look at what all we've done so far. And I think we're just at the beginnings of prerequisites. My goal today was to get your brain started. And then I want you to use this board on your own, or get your teams involved and start doing your own version, right? But now we're finally ready for step one. Isn't that great? We have 10 minutes left. So I can go over another 30 minutes. So if you guys want to continue to stay on, you can. If you don't and you need to leave, you can get back to the recording later. No problems either way. But let's talk about step one. The big question is, from a process perspective, how do we make sure that when new assets are born into the company and they're managed throughout their life cycle and they're retired? I want some feedback from you guys. How do we do this? What are some processes, some steps, some things to think about, some tools that you can use throughout all this? I'll give you an example. Let's take managed throughout the life cycle. I'll pick this one. I think on occasion, maybe an annual accounting reconciliation, right? So we just kind of go through everything and make sure what we're paying for, we have record of in our asset inventories, right? Another one that we might do is now I'm going to do this one for discovery, or let's do device discovery, so this might be through vulnerability scanning. All good vulnerability scanning tools will have the ability to tell you like new devices that it's never seen before. That's really valuable. So now that your brain is thinking about this, let's start popping in some notes here on how we handle the born, managed, retired discussion.
that's where my head went, Alex, but that's provided they actually have one.
Well, I expect we have to bring it to the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I am no longer a ScalePad employee, but during my tenure there, it was the product that I thought was the coolest that they were rolling out. They have this service now where they'll ship you a label. You ship the whole device off, they recycle it, they NIST, whatever the NIST thing is around data discovery, but they do NIST appropriate data destruction, send you back a certificate
of destruction. Yeah.
Yeah, and that way it all follows the right pipeline. And,
so lifecycle insights, I'm adding this to the tool. See, this is why sometimes you go back and forth. Any others that are in that kind of vein, Alex, that I could mention? AKA give me some competitors.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think who does assets well. Propel Your MSP is a really good one. We didn't have that many competitors, man.
That's
You're
fine.
hurting me.
Two's fine. That just gives people why life cycle's on there. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, are we struggling here on this one? How assets are born, managed, and retired, or is it that this is really simple? Because we only have a few on here. That's okay.
I mean, do you expect to see things like the RMM tool on here that manages it throughout its life cycle? I mean,
Yeah.
that's definitely something where it checks
Yeah.
in and continues to give us inventories and things like that.
Yeah, pop that in there. Yeah. And I think that can be both. I think it's mostly managed through the life cycle, right? The RMM handles that.
And what about software management, right? So actually, if you were using something as a business and then you switch to something else, if you do the dentist thing, right? If you go from one to the other, how do you get the old one out, right? I don't know.
Yeah. So, and I think it's to your point on that, Nick, I think it's totally fair to do copy pasta here. Device discovery, vulnerability scanning tools should do some of that, right? They should let us know, hey, this asset is, maybe the network address changed on it. Maybe we don't care about that if it's DHCP, but maybe we do care about it. Went to a totally different network. Maybe, I don't know, something network access control, I think has a lot to do with some of this capability. I think we want to think, let's keep your brains too on cloud. What about cloud? Like cloud service configuration management tools, those kinds of things that kind of let you see not just misconfigurations, but things that have gone off standard or off baseline. So cloud should play into this. I also go ahead.
I was going to say asset review, because that was one of the things we did where we'd come in, but it's kind of falls under your annual accounting, if you will. But coming in and saying, hey, these are the 74 machines we have for you. And they're like, wait, what? I don't have that many. And then as you work through it, they're like, oh, yeah, I unplugged that and stuck it in the closet 4 weeks ago.
Okay. Going to kind of connect those together to your point there on that. It's good. So I also think we need to expand on IT setup more. I think that's too generic, right? Whoever wrote that is right. It's that is a big piece of it. So what does IT setup look like for us in terms of how assets are born and how we're made known to us? I'll give you an example. Approval processes. We shouldn't just have the reason that companies have approval processes to purchase things is not just because we have bureaucrats and red tape to slow things down, but so that we know about it. I remember my perch days, we had some direct deals with some really large companies. Like I could say the name and you would know the name. Everyone on this call would know the names of some of these companies, and their process for this, called procurement, is extremely detailed, extremely. And as much of it is a pain in the butt, I understood why they did it, because they really had to get a good picture of who, how, why, when, where. There's a lot of questions that have to be answered before a big org like that can get something in place. Now, I'm not saying that has to exist for smaller companies, but there should be some process to do this. This is why, like, you take Roost, for example. One of the things Roost is doing that a lot of MSPs love is their workflows to allow onboarding and offboarding of users, to make sure that things are done in an organized fashion, right? So I think we can even talk about approval processes. We can add, user onboardings via
yeah, I'd almost add onboarding, offboarding.
I was going to say that RPA stuff with Roost, that was exactly what had sprung to my mind about the user creation. And then the license, right? And then so the actual provisioning of the licenses is creating new assets for the business that they're licensed to, right? Whether or not you have O365 or all the other stuff that can come with those licenses when they're created, and then managing them when they
Guess what you
When
just
they
made me
leave the
think of,
company.
Nick? You're exactly. So I went all the way back here to what is an asset for your device, for your MSP. Wouldn't licenses count?
Yeah,
Yeah.
great. Yeah,
So
yeah.
we now have licenses on here. You see how this works? Like,
So
this is why these things, it's so valuable for us to start, really thinking about this.
I've done that with the onboarding, offboarding, setting up forms with, like you said, with approval. So the manager has to say, oh, it's a developer and they need this software package, this
Yeah.
type of machine. And then I know a lot of the MSPs have, oh, for this client, they have, 4 different types of user. So what type of user is it? Well, then that triggers the type of machine and software.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually do something along those lines. I mean, we in terms of machines, we don't procure machines based on the user. I mean, we pretty much standardize everything, but we do have forms where you know they can, they're not as detailed as they should be, but that's where everything is approved. Like, okay, Sandy, it's needs access to Razor's Edge, right? Which is a fundraising application, right? And she will need access to the public relations directory. So that's
Yeah.
where they.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, that the software profile, right, of the licenses that are, for the accounting user, or for the, the dental tech, or, those kind of roles. It's not just the hardware profile, yeah, but then the software profile of what you get, depending on where you sit in the org, could also be managed that same way.
It also depends on what level of management, right? So like if you're using something like Autopilot and it updates and says, okay, here's all the stuff you need, and downloads it. Well, now that license has shifted from the old computer to the new computer. So it depends on what you want to track and where. But typically this software is installed on this device, or it's on the cloud for cloud access.
It's good. Really, really good. All right. So we can always come back to this, but let's get to, in the last maybe 20 minutes we have left, 25. Let's get to step 2. So this is where there is only step 1 for enterprise, right? There's done. But step 2 for you, this brings up a really big question and I'm going to split this into 2 buckets. It's well and good to zoom out and see all of these sticky notes and all of this process. But if you're charging $150 a seat, you can't do it. I don't know how you profitably do all of this right. Now, maybe you can do a very small portion of this if you can get it really automated. But I question our ability to do this correctly and right at a per seat cost. So let's open up. I'm going to go back to the Word doc, or the Google Doc here on eating your own tacos, right? So we've talked about, you should do this for yourself. And then we get into this first question: bundle or do we do separate billing? Now, I'll just tell you, I'm in the separate billing category for something like this. I know, Alex, you are too, in the sense of like, what happens when you try to standardize across CIS controls and you have the one client that's like 30 users, maybe 5 users. Let's use 5, 6 users. You can't profit, because the amount of work that this takes to get this in motion is significant, regardless of how big the client is. Now, some of it is volume based for sure, but a lot of this is work that it doesn't matter how big the client is or isn't. So I am a believer of, you got to figure out how you build the compliance services and billing into all of this. So before we get into separating between new clients and existing clients, let's answer that question first. Am I wrong? Is there another way to do it? What do you guys think, as far as like how to bundle in or bill separately for compliance types of services?
In my operations, this would definitely fall under projects.
Okay.
Yeah, projects. We bill at an hourly rate for projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen it done many ways. I think the challenge is that if you're an MSP supporting a client, you need some level of this, period. So it's not something you can offer for them to like opt out of. So the way I've seen that handled in the past is either, hey, we have an onboarding project and for your size, it's going to be X. I've also seen it done as your initial bill is basically twice your monthly bill. So that extra bill, if you will, is for all the onboarding expense.
Well, I think onboarding and compliance are two different things, right? There's going to be some, you've got to have MFA everywhere, and you've got to meet some minimum best practices, right? Wes has a slide that's like, must be this tall to ride this ride, right? And there's a little bit of must be this tall to ride this ride that you're going to have as part of your contract that is also baked into every compliance framework. But I wouldn't get hung up on that. I would make sure that my client understands many of our best practices support your compliance journey, but we'll still have to go back when you go to become compliant and check the box and provide the evidence and show that we are doing what we say that we do. And that's the difference. Is I'm going to come make you do it. But then when you go to become compliant, you're going to have to provide logs and evidence and all this other stuff that shows you do what you say you do to an auditor.
Good. Okay. So now that we've kind of answered that question of it can't, I think we all agree you can't just default bundle and just say, oh, I'll do this just because I'm a nice guy and I've been charging you $150 a seat and I'll just find a way to make it work. The math doesn't work. So now that we know that, the next question is, let's start focusing on new clients, because I actually think it's easier here with new clients, right? Because new clients, they don't have any historical memory of you. At least they unless they're coming back to you after they left you. So you have the ability to say things like, hey, Miss Client, in order for us to get started, one of the things that we do, just like you would see if you're seeing a new doctor, is we need to do an assessment. All new relationships start with an assessment. And we're so confident in our assessment that you don't even have to move forward with us in our services. You could continue just to use our assessment and walk out the door and see you later. That's why it's a paid assessment, by the way, because we're doing a lot of work and it's a lot of expertise. But what you're going to get out of this paid assessment with us is you're going to understand a whole bunch of things. And one of those things could be the beginnings of an asset inventory. And the reason that comes in play is because they need to know whether they use you or not. They need to have some idea of what in the world is in their network so that you can accurately make sure that you know how to build them, so that they know the assets that they're defending. And this gets into the Brian Blakely, as I mentioned before, his whole discussion of how you make money. I think as part of that assessment, you should have the how do you make money? What assets do you have in your network? We're used to doing this, right? If you've been trained in how to do MSP for the past 10 years, what are you told? You're told every assessment starts with the network detective scan. And you drop the 500 pages on their desk, and you blow them away with all this stuff, right? And then we've learned over the years that's worthless because the decision maker is like, well, I don't understand all this raw data. But I do still think the raw data collection is really important so that you can really start to build towards what we're trying to talk about here. So I say all that to say, agree or disagree, and then I want to know, how do we handle selling this to new clients? I want to know talk tracks. I want to know things you focus on, what you say to them. Give me some feedback and brainstorming into this box here.
Chirp, chirp.
And I'll go ahead and say, I've never actually done this part. I've only done the theory part on the vendor side. And so I'm very interested to know the answer to this, because I'm literally going through this right now of how to get that first client. I have some break fix stuff, but actually putting together a package. So you guys can guide the Padawan.
I think that's part of the struggle of coming up with the how to sell to new clients is what's part of your default package? Right? How much of an assessment so that you know what you're managing versus a deep dive?
Well, and I think starting with the assessment, right? You start with that call, and you put it in a package for M365 licenses and email filtering and email protection. When those words don't mean anything to them, right? They literally don't. They wouldn't pay $150 a device, right? They wouldn't order a seat, right? and how do you go from there, right? That's just you. Did you scale it? Do you say, okay, well, I don't even want to talk to you. You're not worth my time, right? Or do you try to have try to open up a conversation? What can I get you at the level that you're at?
Great.
Does that
Okay.
make sense?
No, it makes total sense. And so let me give an analogy here. I've shared this a time or two before. 2 years ago, my nephews were in visiting us from Oklahoma, and one of them got like super sick. We couldn't figure out what the heck was going on. Nothing made sense. He just wasn't getting better. And finally he got to a stage where like, he just was like, it got to a point where we're all worried. So we took him to the ER. Turns out he had or has diabetes type 1. We had no idea. No, we just never had that in the family before. So we idiots just didn't know. And he was so far gone that it was like, they were like, you know how this goes. I mean, it's like the immediate, all this work they did. So he's fine. He's doing great now. He's got his pump, all this kind of stuff. But the doctor gave us this big, long, like 10-page chart, like all these charts and data. And like, I'm like, hey, I just told him like, Doc, I'm just the uncle here. I don't know what any of this garbage means. Can you just tell me like the 3 things I need to know out of this? He's like, oh yeah. He's like, see this here? You need to do this. See this here? It's really bad. We need to get him to there. And then this right here is the big thing that we're going to focus on from here on out. I don't even remember what it is anymore. Right. But I'm like, thank you. That's what I needed. It's great to see all the data, but that's what I needed. And that is the bridge we must cross as MSPs. What is the data that, thank you. I'm glad you have all the back-end data. That's why you're the doctor. I'm glad you have all this data. That's why you're the MSP. Tell me what it means for me out of this. And so I think you're right. I think there's both the raw data, the raw goods, and then to steal from Gary Pica, the finished good, the chocolate cake that we deliver. What's the separation between the two? You can't have a good chocolate cake without really good ingredients. But the fact is the client doesn't care about the raw ingredients. So what's the chocolate cake?
Well, and part of that goes to understanding your customer, because if it's a co-managed deal and you have a CTO in the building, he's a chef and he wants to know the ingredients. But if you have a business owner who's non-technical, they want to know the outcome. Yeah. So I think that know your audience. When you're talking to a CEO or a COO, they want to know outcomes. When you're talking to the COO or the CFO or the CEO or the CFO, they want to know financial impact. If you're talking to a CTO, then you need to be able to talk about all of the components that go into it, or at least some of the technologies that go into it. So a lot of it has to do with who's at the table with you, how much of it you go through. But that means you have to have it all together. You have to have all of that to go have the conversation, because you don't know who you're going to be having to justify yourself to.
Yeah. One thing that I think is really good to do as part of the assessment and at the end of the assessment is simplify the recommendations. Give the recommendations, okay, and prioritize them, right? Like, let's say, if this client has, I don't know, still has servers on premise, right? And they're really old servers. Priority 1 would be, okay, phase out those servers, migrate to the cloud, right? Priority 2, implement, MFA for lack of, other things, but simplify and prioritize the recommendations, so that CFO or CEO who's not technical savvy can understand.
Love it. I'm taking some of your notes right here, Degley. So what I've done is I've sort of like, and again, we're not gonna have time to finish this, but step 2, what goes into the assessment that's still blank up there, and then what do we show to the decision maker, So yeah, all of this goes into, isn't it funny? Like, this is not directly asset inventory, but this is critical to be able to sell the mission of why it's important, Miss Client, that we do some of these things, these compliance things that are not cheap, and they're certainly not free. So yeah, great thoughts. Good stuff there.
And so, and yeah, I think you brought it up earlier, rapid fire tools or something like that, right? Is there a better tool in the market for just for getting something in the MSP side right now? Because that's, I've looked around, like I said, it runs Zero, but they're not really well known in the MSP space.
I think a lot of MSPs are moving towards cyber CNS.
Okay.
its pricing, it's very similar to like a Qualys, a Rapid7. It's not quite as good as any of those platforms because it's newer.
Which is now Connect Secure.
Which is now Connect Secure. Yep. But I'll tell you, it's the pricing model is hard to beat, and I think you give them a few more years and they'll be full lateral. And there's some others. I ran into at ChannelCon. I ran into a company called Shield. They're a new player into the market. So there's probably quite a few, Nick, that are out there.
Yeah, I just appreciate that.
I mean,
And then,
go ahead, Nick.
Actually, yeah, I was going to say, so actually I was talking to Jason Slagle about that. So getting the run zero stuff and then putting into reports that are manageable, right? So yes, I have the raw data, but here's the executive summary. Here's those 3 things you need to know where you're going to make the most impact, right? You got this AD server that's running on, 2012 R2 over here that you really need to get that thing out of your network, right? Let's just stop. We can stop everything else and just get that. But putting those things, I think you use PlexTrack for that, right? Some of those tools that they can pull disparate data together into a manageable kind of report is also, again, in theory, I think that works. I haven't done it in practice. I'll get there.
Yep.
I think part of this gets hard because are you actually trying to just sell an assessment, or are you trying to sell your full service, or are you selling your assessment as part of your service? So,
well,
that's
done right. Hopefully, the assessment sells the service. Right.
I mean, that's an approach too, correct. So it depends
Look at
on
all the
what you're
risk you
going
own.
after as to how you approach the sale.
Yeah. I mean, the great conversation is something around look at all the risk you own. And this is the potential cost that risk could have to your business. It could put you out of business. It could leave you at downtime. It could do whatever. And let's look at what it might cost to live in a better place. And it's that whole like status quo versus better reality.
Yeah. And I think that goes into one of the quote unquote sales approaches that I've used in the past, which is, a lot of our clients have struggled with one of these 3 things. Which one do you struggle with, or is there something else? So it's not a yes, no question, right? So a lot of clients don't actually understand the risk associated with the assets because they don't understand what assets they actually have.
And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about, at the end of that assessment, that that report that you're giving your client, your potential client, you're giving them the solutions and prioritizing those solutions, and that in turn, I guess, turns into a sell, right? And and then you start billing them accordingly, based on as we do it on a project base type of manner.
Yep, it's good.
I mean, think about the world where you pick up your average customer, because your average customer is probably in pretty bad shape when you start with them, right? You go pick them up, things are a dumpster fire. They called you for a reason. And imagine the presentation that goes something like, here's the first 3 things that we've prioritized. However, there's not just 3 things that we marked as insufficient on your risk assessment. And eventually we're going to have to deal with them all. So Mr. Customer, Mr. Prospect, what it feels like to work with me is that we'll fix these 3 things. We'll take a full asset inventory. We'll present it to you every quarter. We'll help you build a budget for asset replacement around that. And then every quarter, we'll sit down and pick out the 2 or 3 things that are the most high priority, and we'll continue to improve. And Mr. Customer, I get it. You think you have the worst network in the world and nothing works and you're frustrated, but it didn't get like this overnight and it won't get fixed overnight. But slow and steady iterative improvement is what we do. It's how our business runs. And imagine if that was your differentiator. We run a process, which is on a regular basis, we come back through and do this. Every MSP struggles to figure out what their differentiator is. We hire the best people, we use the best tools, we blah, blah, whatever. That really isn't a differentiator because everybody can say it. What if your differentiator was, here is my process. Let me spell it out for you. Every 90 days we meet, we go through this strategy talk. We go through this thing that Wes just built, and we help you with budget forecasting to make sure that you can afford to do it. And that's what it feels like to work with me. Is the other guy providing you with something similar to that? Or my favorite was, I would kind of carry in some of this and lay it out in front of a customer and go, this is the budget forecast I give my customers. How does that match up to the one your guy gives you? and you know damn well the other guy doesn't give a budget forecast. So here's a big like wedge between them and their current guy or anybody else walking in the room.
That's
And
something we did as well, was we did a 2-year rolling budget. So every time we met, this is where we are. These are the projects, but it included everything with us. So their vendor costs, their annual, monthly, quarterly costs were all built in. The
well,
maintenance on
nobody other than
server.
the VCIO can do vendor cost and total cost of ownership of technology. The customer's not capable. So if you're not doing it for them, it's just not happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take that conversation because that's right how we need to say it. How do we say that to existing clients? So here's where it kind of gets a little let me step on everyone's toes a little bit, right? We all have most of us have clients we've had for half a decade or more, and we haven't ever done this before. And now we've recognized that it's time to do it. Not just because I can bill them for it, but because literally I entertain too much risk working with this client to not do this. I don't want that negligence word to slip in. It's high time that, cyber risk mandates that I do these things, but the client is doing this, not paying for that. You've never had me do this before. Now you want me to drop X $1,000 to do this now? How about no? How do we deal with that awkward conversation of the client saying, why now?
Well, I can give you an example. So a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, I came to the realization that we needed to improve our cybersecurity cluster, our own, and take also our clients to the next level. Because up until before the pandemic, it was antivirus and some endpoint security software, firewalls, and pretty much that was it, right? So then I started having those conversations with clients, and I was honest with them. Said, hey, we have learned a lot in the past few months, in the past couple of years, and we need to move forward with technology, with your cybersecurity posture, because things are not the same as they were 2-3 years ago. The proliferation of cybersecurity risks, it's huge, right? And we need to be at a better place so we can protect ourselves.
It has to be a decade ago now.
Yeah,
Oh,
and many post that same question. Why now? And I was honest. We didn't know any better 2-3 years ago. But now we're more educated in the subject. We're more informed, and we can't leave you behind. We can't leave your company behind. We got to move it forward.
If you guys aren't working with a solid cyber insurance provider, find one, because they will be the foil for you. It has to be a decade ago that Justin Reinmuth said to me, if you have a customer that still wants admin rights to their machine, just tell them I said they can't have it. Like, I'll write the letter, I'll get on the phone call and say it. Like, it's stupid. We all know they shouldn't do it. So just tell them that you can't be insured if you allow your clients to do these things. Right? Blame your attorney, blame your cyber insurance company. You know what? The world is a scarier, dirtier place than it's ever been. The bad guys have more tools, more money, more resources. And we're to a point now where I just have to get you to move forward. And hopefully we've been talking about these things to our customers for a while, and they've probably been saying no. But that gives us the leverage to say, I can't let you say no anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I think, and that leads to the hard discussion that people don't like to think about, but at some point you may have to cut clients and tell them, I need this because of your risk and my risk. And if you aren't willing to move forward on this, I'm going to have to help you find a different provider.
Well, there's a great conversation there, right? My insurance company won't allow me to carry this burden. So let's talk to your insurance company. Oh, I don't have one. So you're asking me to be your insurance company. You and I both know that's not the business that I'm in, and I can't be that guy, right? If they have an insurance company, great. Let's go talk to them. Hey, my customer doesn't want MFA. How do you feel about that? It's going to be a short
also means you
conversation.
probably need to go back to your master service agreement and make sure it's it's got you
Right.
covered as well, right? So that you can say, look, this agreement we have, you
Well,
see,
and
we're not
the insurance company is going to say, "Oh, no, I can't insure you,
correct.
Mr. customer," or
Correct.
they're going to go, "Well, yeah, that's of course if they don't have it, we just won't cover them," right? And then you could have that conversation. Look, even your insurance company, who you write another check to just for that, won't cover you if you don't have this stuff. And the guy who doesn't have insurance, obviously, you're going to have to sit down with and go, "Okay, that's got to be a mandate from now on. We can't do it."
But then you have the type of client which I had in fire not too long ago, where they'll say, "Well, we don't need to be insured. We'll just wing it."
Yep. And I am not a fire the client guy, but holy crap, there are a few of them out there that.
Yeah, I just fired one that they were not willing to spend a few more dollars a month to improve their cybersecurity posture. They rather spend that money on stupid stuff for the office, like a cold brew machine. But they weren't willing to spend money on their infrastructure, IT infrastructure. So I said, "Okay, we're done."
I feel personally attacked on the cold brew conversation.
That's
But
Me
that's okay.
too, Degley.
The cold brew goes a long way.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Right.
Degley, you had me at every bit till there.
This is how we fuel the cybersecurity team, right?
Yeah,
Cold brew and Mountain Dew.
yeah. No, too bad the cold brew machine wasn't a smart cold brew machine that was connected to the network. But otherwise, I would have said, you know what?
They would have protected that.
I'll manage it for you.
That cold brew
That
machine.
is a critical asset. Yes, that is number one critical asset. Must be restored first.
And I think in that kind of situation, if they're not willing to pay that little extra more, right? And because when something comes or they see their friend get hit bad, they're going to come back to you and say, "Oh, now I see what you're saying, right?
Well,
let's do that."
And that's
Hopefully.
exactly what I told them when we had our last meeting and I pretty much fired them. I told them, "Look, the sad thing is that you're gonna start looking for another provider, and they're gonna come in and tell you exactly what I'm telling you. They're gonna make you want to improve and spend the money. What then? Are you gonna then continue looking for another one that's gonna say no, that you don't need all those things, that will just do with whatever you have now?" So, yeah.
Or they'll get a low ball offer from somebody who doesn't have good services, and then they're gonna and then they're gonna pay that, take the time to switch and get over, and then they're gonna get hit anyway, right?
Yeah.
All right, guys. That probably closes us out for the shop. Any feedback? Do you guys feel like this was helpful, was useful?
Yep. Really good.
2 thumbs up from folks. Okay.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for inviting me.
You notice how though, like we finished this and you're still like, okay, but I might have a lot of the puzzle pieces, but all I've done is I put them on the table. I still got to figure out how to put them into practice. So if you still feel a little bit like this was really helpful, it was an hour and a half well spent, I have some things I can do. I'm telling you, the next thing is just to start putting the puzzle pieces together. And so what that probably requires is, and this is how I wanted to end this, go pick a friendly and say, "Hey, want to get started on this." Now your first friendly should be your own MSP, right? But then when you're ready for the first, client friendly, that's how you get started on something like this, because we've identified probably 70% of the puzzle pieces today. It's not as hard as you might think. It's just complicated because you have to deal with different clients, different expectations, different risk thresholds. Some of them are going to want to do this. Some of them are going to think you're crazy. How do you deal with different cultures? Some of them want to be able to install everything on their own. Some of them don't. How do you put this into process so that you can keep track of this? Like, you don't want to just do this once and then you don't touch it again for another year and you come back and it's so bad. You're like, oh, now I got to come back and tell them again. We got to bill all over again because it's so bad. So you really there's a lot that goes into it, but just take heart that it's not as bad as you might think. And if you hear MSPs that are complaining about controls 1 and 2, maybe send them our way, and we can get them a copy of this recording and they can get going on this. But it does take some hard work. Anyone want to close us out on any like big lessons learned or big ideas that you got from this session?
I want to say one thing, Wes, and that's just that as you have that conversation with your existing customers, it's important to let them know the bad guys moved the goalpost on us. But it's also important to let them know that they're not done moving the goalpost, and that security is forever now something that has to be part of our culture. And that just because I told you it's okay today doesn't mean I'll tell you that in 6 months or a year or 18 months, and that we have to continually reinvent security as the bad guys get smarter and more creative, and that we have to set that conversation up so we don't come back to them in a year and say, actually, we need one more layer. They need to expect that another layer is coming and another layer is coming, and that security is just an ever evolving thing now, instead of a firewall and some antivirus and a backup and walk away.
Yeah.
So just consider that when you're having that conversation.
Yes, and actually, Alex, I've used that, and one thing that I use as an analogy is cars, right? The improvements that cars have gone through, for the past 100 years, right? It's amazing, right? Cars didn't have seatbelts, right? Then as first seatbelt came along, right? There was just a strap across the waist. Then they realized that that doesn't prevent the body from going and snapping in half, right? Oh, so let's do the 3-point seatbelt system, right? Airbags. So it's an evolution, right? And security is the same thing. It's an ever evolving state.
Yep. Well said. Really well said. Anyone else have a big idea they want to share before we close?
I mean, it's like everything else we talk about. Don't overanalyze it. Get started.
Yeah. Yep. And when you get stuck, you just reach out. So we got a community. Hey, this one thing is not working for me. Anyone else have any thoughts? What am I missing here? Yeah. Well said. All right, guys. So that closes this out. If you will listen to the recording, thank you guys for doing that. And I'll have all the links for you in the post description so you can get back to this. And for those of you that are live with me today, same thing. You guys are welcome to use this in any way. Welcome to use this Miro board. We encourage you to do a lunch and learn with your own teams and walk through some of this and get trials on this, because I think you're going to get a lot out of it. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. And if I can ever help you, DM me in the platform, and I will see you guys later. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Wes.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Wes.
everyone.
Bye.
Good night, all.